committee discussed how we could engage our members continually after the election, and also to learn about the various outcomes of measures, since there were so many addressing either equity or justice. And I want to acknowledge it has been a very difficult past year with the pandemic for Los Angeles and many communities. It's been especially hard for our Black, Latino, Asian American, American Indian, and other groups that have been historically marginalized and treated unjustly. In addition, I think the pandemic, of course, has highlighted the inequities even further, and we've been able to see the pervasive discrimination and racism that occurs towards Black people and other groups in our country. And further, misinformation among elected officials is also really impacting our community as well. So now it's more important than ever that we join to strengthen our democracy and to stay engaged in the process, and to address injustices as well. So today you'll hear from the League of Women Voters, Dignity, Empower Now, and Initiate Justice, 3 great groups that are working together to address these type of things. And I hope you'll ask a lot of questions. And now I'll introduce our moderator. She's a long-term League member, and she is also on our board. She's our Voter Services Chair, and so she organizes during the election process many forums for candidates to educate voters on candidates as well as the issues. And of course, that's why we asked her to moderate today. She's also had a long career as a teacher and raised her family. Here's Fran Lapidus.
Thank you so much, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I'm really excited about the program that we have. I do want to remind you, if you're not a League member, that the League is a nonpartisan organization. We never support or oppose a candidate. However, we do study issues, and we reach consensus on those issues and have a position. We then educate and advocate for those issues. So you will find that any ballot measure that deals with an area that we have a position on, we will oppose or support, and you will hear about that today. So the League does advocate for that. So today, we are going to try and be as efficient as possible with our format. So if you have questions, and we will take questions after the discussion of each ballot measure, please put those questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A, so that your questions can be answered. In today's program, we will take a deep dive and will assess the impact of the November statewide ballot measures turnout through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. We will primarily focus on 6 ballot measures that look into the impact on affirmative action, education, criminal justice, voting rights, and the county budget. Each of our distinguished panelists will focus on 2 measures and public policy areas. We will take audience questions after each measure. Let me reiterate that again, so you don't forget. Questions go in the Q&A. Now I'm going to ask each panelist to introduce themselves and remind us the content of the measure that they're discussing, including 3 questions. Give us the context by sharing the ballot measure, how the ballot measure made its way onto the ballot in the first place. How did the measure look to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion? And what challenges did the measure face? And was there a movement, or support for it? So we want to look at those things, and where are we going from here? with that issue. So our first speaker is Gloria Chen-Hu, Vice President for Advocacy for the League of Women Voters of California. And she will address Prop 15, School and Communities First, and Prop 16, Affirmative Action. Gloria, it's all yours.
Thank you. I'm starting with two that we lost, but let me get into that a little bit later. Let me introduce myself. My name is Gloria Chen-Hu. I am the second vice president for programs and advocacy for LWV state of California. I'm also a local board member of the San Jose Santa Clara League, served as its president, went on to what we call our county council, the 5 local leagues in Santa Clara County, and then onto the board of the Bay Area League, which represents 9 counties and 21 local leagues. And so I've had a slow progression moving up the ranks in the League of Women Voters. And in each case and at each level, have learned something new about the league and about the work that we do. I will say that working on legislation advocacy has been something absolutely wonderful and exciting for me, as I've learned more about the work that we do at the state level and how we influence legislation. I also realize that as the league, we have a certain ability to work within the existing positions. At the same time, for those of you who are not members of the League of Women Voters, and I see that there are some from other organizations, I really welcome that. The other thing that I want to say about our positions, the league takes very seriously its positions. These have all come about through local league work to understand what the issues are and make sure we understand them so that we can take action. And unless we have a position, we do not take action. For example, we never studied marijuana, so we could take no positions when that legislation came about, although there are many league members who have very strong feelings about it. However, another example is our criminal justice position, which was strengthened and hardened thanks largely to the work of the LA League, working with San Francisco and a number of other local leagues over 2 years to really craft a position that could be applied statewide. And I want to say that our criminal justice position adopted by convention in 2019 has been very wonderful because it was very appropriate. So with the Black Lives Movement in 2020, we had positions on which we could act and local leagues could take action. I want to comment especially Carolina Goodman from the LA League, who has been such a leader in this, working with Ashley Ravenshea out of the Marin San Francisco League and creating that position that allows us to act so well and continues to head that up. Let me move quickly to the other piece of it is that I have served as the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion State Committee. It's a very small committee. Our work has largely been at the state level, looking at the composition of our board, the nomination process, and participation at a convention. And in our last convention in 2019, I was pleased to see that we had a very significant increase in participation by members of our more diverse community. And we hope to continue this again when we meet in June. That's a long introduction to say that, and maybe because Prop 15 and Prop 16, both of which were positions of ballot measures that the League of Women Voters were very involved with, particularly Prop 15, Schools and Communities First. The loss is very, very painful. However, we want to look at it positively and say, what can we celebrate about it? Prop 15, Schools and Communities First started almost 6 years ago. That's when the league got involved with working on it. And it was a small core group looking for new revenues that would support schools and our local communities. And it continues to be, and as it grew, it was rooted in grassroots communities. Many of the groups that we worked with were from traditionally underserved and underrepresented groups. And this is the first time I think we've so actively worked with so many grassroots organizations. And remember, Prop 13, the original Property Act, happened 40 years ago. And this is the first time in 40 years, which, by the way, the League of Women Voters opposed that when Prop 13 came up. It was the first time in 40 years that the sanctity, if you will, of Prop 13 was finally being impacted. It was considered for the longest time something we could not touch. So let's think about that. We came very, very close. We got 8 million voters to support it, 8.2 million. Unfortunately, 8.8 voted no. We were strongly affected by a lot. We knew that there'd be a lot of money coming into it. But what we like to celebrate is the broad coalition of groups we brought together, a large coalition of groups that we educated about what the impact of Prop 13 was, particularly as it affected the funding for services that so much support our cities, our local communities, our counties, and schools. I mean, this is a structural change in how we historically had been funding our schools. Previous funding had enabled our educational system to be one of the best, not only perhaps in the country, but perhaps in the world. And we've fallen so far as a result of Prop 13. And so this unfortunately did not pass, but again, let's celebrate the positiveness and the league has worked with many groups that historically we hadn't worked with. And I think that's what we're thinking about. Some of you may recall, those of you who worked on it, that we put a huge effort into gathering signatures for the first version, and then we went back and changed it to make it an even better version. It was slated for 2018 and ended up being the 2020 ballot. It was an important piece for putting more monies into where there would be more local control, hopefully money better spent, particularly county monies and city monies, which go to the services that are so important to our community. So it's a huge blow, very painful loss. But again, this suggests to us that we can work on it together. And let me say that the board looking at it is continuing to work with those groups that in coalition that worked in Prop 15, and we'll continue to do so, looking for other avenues and perhaps other opportunities. I will say we were overspent. I think we were able to gather huge amounts of monies from many organizations, including the California Teachers Association, Chan Zuckerman Initiative, and many other groups. We worked very hard on it. The business communities very strongly, and the property owners community and the county assessors for some odd reason also opposed it. So we lost it by, it was a 46% for it and 52% against it. Again, painful loss, however, major effort positively in terms of getting groups together. On Prop 16, I think this was the proposition that came through the legislature. Now, let me remind us all about the differences. To put Prop 15, schools and communities first onto the ballot, we gathered signatures. So it was truly a grassroots kind of an effort to get that onto the ballot measure. Yes.
Gloria, can I interrupt you for a minute? If you're done with Prop 15, let's take questions on that and then
okay, sure.
Prop
sure.
16. So do we have any questions, Mary Lou, on Prop 15?
Hello, everybody. Good morning. I am monitoring the Q&A. We do have a question by Sharon Washington. And Gloria, you can decide to address this or not in how
I'll try
your presentation. Do you think the cost of Prop 15 was too costly for homeowners? And that might be some of the reason in terms of how equity came into play in messaging?
I think that the messaging from the opposition to suggest that it would impact homeowners was an example of the kind of distortion of information that went out that affected the vote. Because very clearly, and as we understand it, this would not have affected homeowners at all. Now, the scare tactic that the opposition put into it was that this would begin to erode the basis of Prop 13, which is to protect homeowners. And we were very clear it would not. And in fact, the language actually strengthened the protection for the homeowners' property tax, but it was the languaging and the messaging put out by the business and commercial and industrial property owners that wanted to really defeat this.
In terms of looking ahead, there's a question, what future efforts can we hope to support to further the work that Prop 15 laid out?
We're not sure in which direction. All I know is that the board has authorized us to continue to work with those partners that we worked with. There are many good groups that we worked with that supported it. Let me talk a little bit about some of those groups. There were over 500 endorsers of Prop 15, and including many in the elected legislators. So we're hoping that we will keep, was particularly the core group of what's called the group called California Calls, and as well as PICO. These are social justice groups that we will continue to not only work together, not on many other social reform issues, but possibly look at other opportunities to make change. It may be in a different format. We may look for other revenues to get businesses and corporations to pay their fair share. If, by the way, Make It Fair was the original movement of the campaign, was called Make It Fair, because it really is about fairness. If we look at how property taxes are derived in other states and how it was derived in California prior to Prop 13, businesses paid a much bigger share, and they're not paying their fair share. So there may have to be some other ways to get businesses. Certain communities have looked for a business tax in their local communities, but these are all small little ways at nibbling at the same thing. We will continue to look for ways to address some of these inequities that exist. I'm not sure which direction we'll go. I mean, this is kind of a blow to us, and we're kind of sitting back, but the continued effort to make change will happen.
Do you think there were some external challenges outside of the issue itself? For example, as Virginia Wexman states, maybe the pandemic, some of the challenges that came about with COVID that impacted either how voters looked at this issue or the vote itself?
I'm sure that might have had an impact, because there's, with the unemployment, with businesses going out of business, there might have been more sympathy for businesses. It's sort of interesting to me because 80% of this new revenue from property taxes would have come from 8% of the businesses. So the impact would have been largely on, the large corporations, the Apples, the IBMs, the large hotel chains, Disneyland. They're the ones who would have paid the bulk of it, and if you go back to, well, maybe not Disneyland, but a lot of other businesses, and a lot of rich people, by the way. In the 2020, we saw large companies like Amazon, like Apple, grow. I mean, we've seen a lot of people in certain segment and certain communities just actually do better in 2020. Let's take a look at that. And I think sometimes we are so focused on my personal feeling, and I speak for myself. We don't recognize the larger dynamic at work, which is that I'm someone who believes in the strength of capitalism, but capitalism unregulated can be problematic, and I think that one of the things we've gotten so far from pro business, and perhaps that has distorted our thinking. I worked in the business community. I know how the for-profit world works. There are certain things that the for-profit world does not do well.
And we have a couple of questions from somebody who's joining us today regarding Proposition 15 and the effect on triple net leases, and how that would have made operating. So, I mean, can you just address that in terms
Sure.
of, did that have?
So for those small businesses who may have those kinds of agreements, lease agreements, they would have seen some impact. The language of the bill, if you looked at it, though, would have been, they would not have been impacted for probably the first 5 years. The transition, there was a transitional period that affected smaller businesses, I think that they would have not seen those immediate increases. Again, it was overblown, and I think and people focused on those things. You know, there's a cost to doing business. There's a cost, and there's a reward system. And I realize there was a great deal of sympathy for that. However, if you look at the bigger picture, the bigger loss is the lost opportunity to improve our school systems, the lost opportunity to build the infrastructure that our local communities need and provide the services that are so severely now affecting particular communities. And the COVID-19 has really exacerbated the impact and shown how clearly our system and our society is so imbalanced. And I think that that's the work that we need to focus on in the league, is the imbalances and inequity that exists that are structural. This is a good example of a structural difference. And that's where I think the league in its policy making and in its work on statewide legislation is so important. There are really important partners that we work with. There are special interests. And I think the league needs to work with those particular partners that are working with us to build more equity in our system. And I think that that is something that it will be better for all society when we're a more equitable society. It will be better for all of us. Look at what happened January 6th in the Capitol. Look at what is happening and the distrust that exists. I think we need to rebuild trust. I think we need to rebuild and work with making our society, our government better for all of us.
I want to move on because our time is sort of up for this one. We'll save some of the questions, and if we have time at the end, we'll come back to some of the questions we didn't get to. So Gloria, now would you like to go ahead and talk about Prop 16?
Yeah, Prop 16, unlike 15, which came out of the legislature, and it sailing through, I think it was, like without any effort. And I think it was considered by a lot of people, this is a done deal. Everyone is going to be supportive of this in this day and age. And the league supported it. We didn't put any effort into it. There was not a big campaign for it. And I think that it was just kind of shocking to all of us that it failed. And I was even surprised that sometimes some pushback by people who didn't understand it. I think I'm of an age where I remember when affirmative action was first instituted in this country. I understood the imbalances to try to correct, but it's been many years. And I think there's probably been some sense that we don't need it anymore. Besides, this was not an imposition of affirmative action. This was simply an opportunity to enable our public agency. This is not going to apply to everybody. This would have enabled our public agencies, Prop 16, to consider issues like color and race and national origin in making its selection. And people misunderstood that to be perhaps, and it was presented that way, that it would take things away from certain communities, and it was misunderstood. And I really don't have a whole lot to say about it because we didn't really spend a lot of time. Unfortunately, we just kind of assumed that in this day and age that this would have not been a problem. It lost by a considerably higher percentage. I think something like 57% of voters voted against it. We're surprised at that. ACLU and California Teachers Association supported it. We supported it, but we didn't put any money into it. And we didn't put a strong effort into it. And I'm sort of disappointed that we didn't, but we just thought that this would be, all indications, I think initially was that, this is going to be a done deal. I have very little more to say about that, except I'm very disappointed in it. But sometimes, and the league has had its share of disappointments in legislation, but we've had our share of support of positive reaction. And I think the big one that's helping us right now as we move into the post-census area is the work that we're doing with redistricting. That took us a long time to get past. That happened 10 years ago, and thankfully it has become the model for the rest of the country to have an independent redistricting commission. And that was something that we fought much for. And so, we balance some successes and some failures.
Questions on 16, Mary Lou?
Yes, Gloria. A question regarding the different voting communities. I think this is a great question. Do you perceive that there was maybe a age group difference that was impacted with how voters perceive Prop 16, for example. Younger generations, millennials who don't perceive race the same as maybe older generations, and how that might have impacted the way people voted, their voting behavior.
Yeah, I suspect there is, but I personally suspect there is. I haven't done a whole lot of study and analysis on this. I just kind of threw my hands up. Those of us who remember when I entered, as I was talking to somebody the other day, when I entered the workforce, there were very few women in management. I was part of the wave of early managers in the workplace, but my younger sisters, 10 years younger, that sort of was an expected thing for them by the time they entered the workforce. So yes, I suspect that there is a perception of that. I have to say, as an Asian American woman, born in the United States, so I don't know any other culture, but a lot of new immigrants, and I will say a lot of them, honestly, I think are Asians, who think it would have been a negative impact. I had to really work hard on the community of young meaning new to the United States, who think that the issue of race doesn't affect them. Or we don't need to do anything affirmatively in support of that, or to reach out. I think Asian Americans, especially new and who came over relatively educated and wealthier, might, for example, have had a different point of view than myself. Although I'm comfortably, I've had a good career, and I've been able to accumulate significant financial successes and achievements. I understood that there was a time prior to entering the workforce where women were just not expected to move into management, or were not expected to have the capability to do the kinds of things that we expect now. I mean, it's not as unexpected, but we still have barriers, and the barriers tend to also be in the issues of race. And perhaps Asians have been not as tainted by that as other communities. In fact, we have the opposite effect, kind of an assumption that you probably know more than you do. We have kind of that positive stereotypes, at least some Asians do, not all groups. But yeah, I do think that there may be a generation difference there in thinking.
Yes. Now, in terms of looking at, I mean, if you look at the ballot, right, ballot measure was explicitly, I mean, it's very, this would be the ballot measure that you could explicitly say can be looked through and was written with through the intention of the DEI lens. And the fact that it did not pass is what can be, I guess, what can be assumed from that in terms of where we're going with our politics, and within kind of generally within all the different policy areas that look to create some changes, some systemic changes. Can anything be drawn from that? And furthermore, I think somebody asked, could that ballot measure also be, could have it been a vehicle to express a backlash against some of the systemic changes that we have been seeing? So your thoughts?
I actually think, and it's really interesting, I served on a panel of Asian Americans to talk about this measure. It's really interesting. The comment from someone who was from out of state, but active in a national Asian American rights group, said she thought the problem was that the messaging around it was wrong. And I'm thinking about that. Perhaps it was misunderstood. I think sometimes, we still have this issue of equality versus equity. And well, if we're equal, then we don't need these measures. And if you looked at the actual ballot measure, it's a very lame wording. It simply says that it will allow diversity as a factor in public employment, education, and contracting decisions. It doesn't affect the private sector. It is only one of many factors. It is not the one criteria. It's one factor of many factors. And I think it was in a way it wasn't it was kind of lame, but it just allowed, once again, for campuses to make decisions on admission, for a government contractor looking at a bid for, you get two equally good candidates, you might weigh one because it's from a minority contractor. But everything else being the same, or it's, as again, one factor. So I think perhaps the messaging was off. I don't think but also, again, that sense of, but it makes it unequal, equity versus equality. I think in a lot of people's minds, they're the same, and we don't understand equity more, and we've got to talk equity more than equality. I think there's a misunderstanding of that, and I think a lot of is all of us in our gut and in our understanding has got to think about the larger picture of what equity really means and how racism has affected systemically and structurally lives of huge communities of people. And we're not just talking race sometimes too, it's economic inabilities or poverty issues that we need to help those who by luck or misfortune or situations fall into certain conditions. And I think this issue of equity has got to be focused on more than equality. I think we misunderstand that. That's kind of my personal reaction to that question.
We have time for one more question. Mary Lou, is there one more? Okay. I
Yes,
guess so.
Fran, I guess we can squeeze one more question in.
Yeah, we have time for one more.
Gloria, how do you think the struggles everyone is encountering in making a living wage might feed into some of the competitiveness that you've alluded to in your discussions? Kind of looking at the state of the economy and the struggles that people are facing, and how that impacts how they vote.
That's a good question. Perhaps in the midst of everyone struggling, there's perhaps, you're suggesting that less of interest in working on equity issues. That I don't know. It may be true. I actually have to be optimistic, and I am optimistic. I actually think I think we're doing a nationalist, and California always been sort of ahead of the rest of the country, but I think there's a pivot to better understanding. And I look at, for example, what's happening in the climate change community, which I'm very, very involved with. I serve in the climate change committee, and I'm very interested in that issue. Is we're focusing on, for example, not just climate change, but we're looking at the equity and environmental justice and climate justice issues. I think there's a greater, broader community slowly moving toward justice issues. I think the Black Lives Movement I hope is not just, and I know it wasn't just a one-time deal, because I think there's a huge cry, but we're going through transition and change. And a lot of it has to be real soul searching by a lot of folks to think about what it is and what is the America we want. What is a California we want? I think about, I just did a legislative interview with one of our local legislators, actually far south from us, but he's a grandson of farm workers. He grew up on a farm. He understood farm workers' housing conditions. He understands the problems and the limitations, and also worked closely with many undocumented. We've got to open up our souls and our hearts to people who are different than we are. And I think a lot of times, we have strong leagues in many of the urban areas. We need to also be conscious of and thinking about those issues that affect all of us. I know less about, I'm learning more about the water issues in the Central Valley and how they impact people there, about the pollution that occurs in the North California that goes down the San Joaquin Valley and hits people in the Central Valley. We just need to be really thoughtful and thinking more broadly than just our immediate community. People fight so hard on housing issues, don't want that house, the ism. But let's look at the bigger community. Our lives are going to be safer. We'll be, look at COVID. we will be safer as a whole community when we can break down barriers rather than creating them.
Thank you so much, Gloria, for your enlightenment this morning. We really appreciate it. We're going to move on, and our second speaker today is Taina Angel Vargas, who is the founder and executive director of Initiate Justice. She's going to address Prop 17, Restoring Voting Rights for Felons, and Prop 20, the rollback on criminal justice reform. It's all yours.
Good morning. Thank you all so much for having me here today. I want to give a shout out really quickly to Dora Rose from the League, who was like really instrumental in helping us pass Prop 17. So a little bit about myself. My name is Taina Vargas. As Fran mentioned, I'm the founder and executive director of Initiate Justice. What our organization works to do is to abolish prisons by activating the political power of people who are currently incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, or folks like me who have incarcerated loved ones. I'm personally impacted by the prison system. I'm having a loved one having served 7 years inside the California state prison system, and I was there the entire time. So to talk a little bit about Prop 17 and how it got to be where it is, I should say that this is something that has been several years in the making and has been grassroots from top to bottom. So when Initiate Justice first started back in late 2016, we started talking about, policy ideas that would help achieve our mission of activating political power of directly impacted people. And one of our members who is incarcerated and is now on our board of directors, Rasan Thomas, said, look, if y'all care about impacted people having their political voices heard, the first thing that we need is to be able to have our right to vote. So back in 2017, we tried to qualify an initiative for the 2018 ballot that was called the Voting Restoration and Democracy Act. And that initiative would have restored voting rights to all currently incarcerated people and formerly incarcerated people. As folks know who've worked on a ballot initiative, it is very expensive to go the signature collection route. So we did not collect the qualifying amount of signatures. However, the following year, we were contacted by Assembly Member Kevin McCarty, who said that he was interested in a legislative route, but unfortunately felt that it wouldn't make it through the legislature if we included currently incarcerated people. So we began to draft language and began working with coalition partners such as the League of Women Voters, ACLU, Anti-Recidivism Coalition, Californians United for a Responsible Budget, to name a few. And in January of 2019, we introduced ACA 6, which became known as the Free the Vote Act. And that was a constitutional amendment to place an initiative on the ballot to restore voting rights to all people who are currently on parole. We unfortunately did have to do a ballot measure because it's written in the California state constitution that people in prison and on state parole did not have the right to vote. So it was a legislative effort that was grassroots, that was led by groups that were led by directly impacted people, but also led from the inside. We collected more than 3,000 legislative letters of support from currently incarcerated people to help move the legislation. And in June of 2020, it passed. It took just over a year and a half for us to finally get ACA 6 out of the legislature with the 2/3 and bipartisan support that we were hoping to get. So in June of 2020, ACA 6 became Prop 17. And we switched our coalition from being a legislative coalition to a ballot measure coalition. And we didn't raise a lot of money. Our budget was just under $1 million. But I think that we were able to be successful because it was a campaign that we had spent, the last 3 years or so laying the foundation for. It was a grassroots led effort. People inside were getting their loved ones on the outside to register to vote and to get involved in the campaign. So thanks to those efforts, Prop 17 passed by the highest margin out of all of the other ballot propositions on the 2020 ballot. And, now there are more than 50,000 formerly incarcerated people who have the right to vote. And Prop 17, actually made it so now there is not a single person who's a citizen of California who's formerly incarcerated who does not have the right to vote. So as long as you are not currently incarcerated, you could vote. But even if you're incarcerated in county jails, you can vote. So our next steps for Proposition 17 would be to go back and to fight to restore voting rights for currently incarcerated people as well. I fundamentally don't believe that anybody should lose their right to vote simply because they're impacted by incarceration. Most other democracies don't take away your right to vote. And the United States is actually the only democracy in the world where you can potentially lose your right to vote forever because of a felony conviction. So I'm hoping that California can eventually join the states of Maine and Vermont where you never lose your right to vote. So, this ballot proposition was very important for diversity, equity, and inclusion because people who are impacted by incarceration absolutely should have their right to vote restored, should never have their right to vote taken away, just because of the fundamental principles of this is a democracy. And to quote one of our incarcerated members, Juan Haynes, democracy needs everyone, but also because society is losing when we don't have the voices of people who were failed by our social systems, included in, electing officials, included in determining how our tax dollars are being spent. So, Prop 17 was a huge step in the right direction, but we've been very clear from the beginning that it doesn't stop here. We don't believe that it's only formerly incarcerated people who should have their voting rights restored. Everybody impacted by incarceration should have the right to vote. And in terms of challenges, I think the greatest challenge that we faced more than any one particular group was the overall narrative of, crime and punishments and being tough on crime. There are a lot of people who believe that your right to vote should be taken away as a form of punishment for committing an offense. And, that's something that I fundamentally just disagree with. In a free and fair democracy, there should be nothing that takes away your right to vote, to participate in democracy. And that is something that we fought against with Prop 17, but we have fought against in all of these propositions and pieces of legislation that we continue to work on. That's a narrative that we fought against in Prop 20. That's a narrative that we fought against in, even in Measure J, which Yvette will be talking about later on. So, the battle is not over. We'll work hard to ensure that everybody has their right to vote restored, but we're also now working to ensure that people who now have the right to vote are aware that they have the right to vote and are encouraged to vote and to participate in their democracy. So very, very grateful to have had the opportunity to work on Prop 17 for all of the lessons and opportunities that it provided. It was a huge step in the right direction, but the work is not over, and Initiate Justice, and I'm sure our coalition members will continue to keep up the fight. And I'm happy to answer any questions on Proposition 17.
Mary Lou, do we have questions?
Yes, there is, and thank you. Are there any organized efforts now to reach those formerly incarcerated new potential voters, one, to register them to vote and to provide them some voter education? And if you're, and furthermore, what would that look like ideally for you?
Yeah, well, I can speak to what Initiate Justice has been doing and what the Free the Vote Coalition has been working on. So the first step is doing outreach to all of the county clerk's office and the Secretary of State to update their websites and update their voter information. The last time I checked, if you tried to register to vote through the Secretary of State's website, it's still asking you to check a box under penalty of perjury saying that you're not on parole in order to register to vote. So that's something that we're hoping will change soon. I mean, the election was a few months ago now, so really there's no excuse for that. We're also in direct communication with the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation to ensure that when people are being released they're made aware of their new voting rights. We're trying to make sure that they ensure that parole officers are letting folks know that they have the right to vote. But frankly, we don't trust these systems. They are very good at giving out misinformation. So what Initiate Justice has been doing in terms of our grassroots efforts are, one, we're partnering with LA County Free the Vote, who have been working hard for a while now to ensure that formerly disenfranchised people are made aware of their right to vote. And Initiate Justice is also a membership organization. So we have about 35,000 currently incarcerated people who are on our mailing list in California, who get our newsletters every quarter. And that's just over a third of the entire incarcerated population who's a member of Initiate Justice. So we have been, through our newsletters, communicating to folks that you have the right to vote as soon as you are released from prison. Request a voter registration form, or letting folks know that they can register to vote online. We've also been doing webinars so that family members on the outside can communicate to their loved ones on the inside that they have the right to vote, and that folks who are already out know that they have the right to vote. So we've been doing our best to convey the message through the existing channels that we have, but we know that it's something that's going to be ongoing, and we will continue to incorporate it into every aspect of our organizing.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Yes, two kind of very focused questions that I'll sneak in. Are there can you think of any practical barriers, like systemic barriers? I think you pointed one out, which is probably one of the easiest things as a Secretary of State can address in terms of the registration form. Are there any other barriers that you see forthcoming?
I mean, I'm not sure if I would necessarily call this a structural barrier, but I think because communities impacted by incarceration have felt disenfranchised and disempowered for so long, sometimes it's hard to convince people to register to vote, or that their vote matters, because we have been made to feel powerless and voiceless for so long. So it's something that we are continuing to work against, and to encourage people to have their voices heard, to remind folks that systems of oppression can only continue to thrive when we feel powerless. So, little by little, we break through that mold. And, I see people who are registering to vote every day, and, who are encouraging others to do that as well. So I think it's something that's just going to be a long-term ongoing battle as we work to dismantle these systems of oppression that have existed for so long.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Proposition 20.
Absolutely. I'm excited to talk about Proposition 20 because it failed decisively, like it deserved to. So Proposition 20 was a ballot measure that was put on the ballot by some concerted efforts by law enforcement, namely District Attorney of Sacramento Ann Schubert, and former law enforcement and current sitting Democratic Assembly member Jim Cooper, who also represents the Sacramento area. But also, some businesses, largely grocery store chains, were very invested in Proposition 20 because they wanted to roll back some very instrumental reforms we have made over the last several years with Propositions 47 and Proposition 57. So essentially what Proposition 20 would have done is it would have made certain offenses that had been reduced to misdemeanors under Proposition 47. It would have made them felonies again. It would have made certain offenses that are currently not considered to be violent offenses. And it would have increased punishment, increased criminalization, and worst of all, in my opinion, which is kind of a little known fact about Prop 20, it would have made it impossible for anybody convicted of a violent offense to earn any time off of their sentence while they were in prison. So that would have been pretty much every single person in prison would not have had the chance to earn any time off of their sentence, no matter how many educational programs they were in, how many rehabilitative programs they were participating in. They would have had to do 100% of their time. So Proposition 20 would have been expensive. It would have been a dangerous message set back the hard fought efforts that we have won over the last several years. So I think that the fact that it died by the second highest margin out of all of the other ballot propositions. So I think the voters made it very, very clear that we are not interested in moving back on this, tough on crime narrative. We are not interested in increasing penalties or criminalization. It's clear that our prison system is not effective at keeping us safe. It's only effective at punishing people, causing trauma, exacerbating social issues, and costing the state a lot of money. So, yeah, I think the efforts against Proposition 20 were also grassroots efforts. Many of us who have been working so hard to pass ballot propositions such as Prop 47 and Prop 57 were involved in the efforts to defeat Proposition 20. Initiate Justice in particular was involved in defeating Prop 20 because it would have impacted so many of our members who are working really hard to come home and be reunited with their families. So our grassroots efforts looked like anytime we mailed something inside to encourage support of Prop 17, we were also encouraging opposition to Proposition 20. So folks on the inside were mobilizing their loved ones on the outside. We were also training our members on the outside on how to register to vote and make sure that they voted against Proposition 20. And I know that there were, many other community organizations that took the lead on defeating Prop 20, that put money into defeating Prop 20. So I think, yeah, the combination of Proposition 17 passing with such a high margin and Proposition 20 being defeated at such a high margin is clear that the voters of California want to move forward. We do not want to move backwards on criminal justice reform issues. I don't really have much else to say about Proposition 20, except it would have been terrible and it deserved to die the swift death that it died on the ballot.
Do we have any questions on Prop 20?
There are no questions.
Thank you.
And actually, that says it all.
You did a wonderful job on Prop 20.
I mean,
thank you so much.
Well, Fran, if I may, I guess I can ask, which is kind of a forward-looking question, right? Do you perceive, I mean, the effort was done, it failed. Are there any potential, I mean, there's always other potential efforts that will be done in the future, right? Is there anything that you can say to address those continuous efforts to kind of undo some of the changes that have been done in the last couple of years? And to that extent, what more is there to be done, right? Which is kind of a forward-looking.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that we just have to keep our foot on the gas. We can't slow down at all, even when we do have these victories. And I think that we need to continue to push for more sustainable and more impactful changes. I think a perfect example of blowback that we're seeing right now is here in LA County around the policy reforms that DA Gascon is trying to implement, namely around repealing enhancements, repealing 3 strikes, no longer seeking the death penalty or trying youth as adults. We're seeing that the District Attorneys Association fighting really hard against that. They're suing DA Gascon. I anticipate that there, may be future legislation or ballot initiatives to try and make it more difficult to repeal these enhancements. So I think that we need to be extra vigilant and, just continue to uplift the messages that tough on crime has not helped anybody. It has not made us more safe. It has only succeeded in further devastating our communities. And we just really need to be really brave and unapologetic in all of the instances in which we talk about these issues. And yeah, just keep up the fight. Don't let our foot off the gas at all.
Okay. Thank you so much, Taina. We're going to move on. And our final speaker is Yvette Allais, who's from the Senior Policy Lead at Dignity and Power Now. And Yvette will address Prop 25, the end of the cash bail system, and Prop J, the LA County measure that focused on LA County budget allocation. Yvette?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for opening up some dialogue and reflection on some really critical propositions that have had a big impact on our community. I'm going to start with Measure J and then move into Prop 25. But before I dive into the measures themselves, I'm going to set some context for both of these measures, which is important, and a little bit about myself. So my name is Yvette Allais. I'm the Senior Policy Lead at Dignity and Power Now. I'm also the co-founder of La Defensa, two organizations led by impacted people, formerly incarcerated people, and people with loved ones that have been incarcerated. I am one of them. I am the child of a formerly incarcerated person. I'm also a formerly undocumented person and a survivor of violence. And all of these experiences have impacted my organizing and my policy work. So to start off, I want to lift up that Los Angeles County is the epicenter of mass incarceration. We're also the epicenter of houselessness. Historically, we have exported really harmful policies like broken windows policing, like gang injunctions, not just to the rest of the country, but to the rest of the world. And I say all this because Los Angeles, like California in general, is often seen as a beacon of liberal policies, as this progressive hub on the West Coast, when the reality is our institutions are incredibly backward, are incredibly regressive and harmful. We here in LA County, we have the largest jail system on the planet. And so all of these pieces, this dissonance between the rhetoric of what we believe ourselves to be and the regressiveness of our institutions is what informed our positions on Measure J and Prop 25. So Measure J didn't come out of nowhere. Organizations and coalitions like Californians United for a Responsible Budget have been pushing for a divestment from law enforcement and investment into our communities for decades. I used to be at Californians United for a Responsible Budget, which is statewide budget advocacy work. And so this past year, when the demand to defund law enforcement was taking center stage, we've really used that momentum to see how the County of LA was feeling about this idea of divestment investment. And Justice LA, the coalition here in Los Angeles that championed decarceration and actually defeated a $3.5 billion jail expansion plan in Los Angeles and led the way in alternatives to incarceration. We did a county-wide survey of our community members and asked, what they wanted the budget to reflect. And, over 70% of the folks that we polled supported divestment from law enforcement, including probation and the sheriff, and investment in housing, in healthcare, in education. And unbeknownst to us, the United Way was doing a similar poll, and they were polling LA County to see if there was support for a measure to divest in harmful systems, punitive system, and invest into care. And our polling matched. There was wide support. So United Way came together with Justice LA, and we drafted Measure J. And like Taina referenced, it is very expensive to get something on the ballot. And in COVID, door knocking and getting signatures was not an option. So the other option to get something on the ballot is to actually get the Board of Supervisors here in LA County to approve this ballot measure. And that's what we did. The county had been moving towards alternatives to incarceration in rhetoric. We worked alongside the county to write the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group report, which is a pretty historic document approved by the board last March. But the funding didn't match the visionary policies in the Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group report. So we understood that this bureaucratic impulse to maintain budgets the way that they've been historically, 1 out of every $5 goes to the sheriff's department. The majority of our budget goes to the criminal legal system. It was important for us to push the county in the right direction. And so that's where Measure J came in. And the Board of Supervisors agreed and put it on the ballot. And so what Measure J does is amend the county charter here in LA County. And it directs the county to provide a minimum of 10% of unrestricted revenues annually for alternatives to incarceration and community investment. That's a minimum of $500 million a year to over $1 billion a year of our locally generated revenue. And it's not a tax. And so this locally generated, it's not a new tax. This locally generated revenue is separate and apart from the funding the county gets from the state or the federal government or philanthropy. So this is just a small piece of the larger pie. And what was critical about this measure is that we included language that those dollars cannot go to or through law enforcement. So we don't direct the county where they need to pull the dollars from, but we're saying that this small piece of a smaller piece of the county budget cannot go to law enforcement or through law enforcement. And it was important for us to include the through piece because often dollars that are intended to reach our communities will go through the probation department or the sheriff's department. And that's where those dollars go to die. They don't make it to our community members. And so even when the county directs probation to disseminate those dollars or the DA's office to disseminate those dollars, they don't make it to our communities. We also included language that this must be a transparent budget allocation process and that the county should create a process for which the community members have input on how those dollars are distributed. So there was nothing like Measure J. It was the only measure of its kind, and it was successful. It garnered a huge amount of support in LA County and really solidified to the Board of Supervisors, and I would say to law enforcement, that the community wants a shift towards care instead of cages. We were massively underspent compared to law enforcement. So law enforcement used typical fear tactics to make the argument that if Measure J passed, that suddenly healthcare workers wouldn't be funded, when in fact we were investing in healthcare workers and we got the support of healthcare unions. We also got the support of local leaders like Mike Bonin, to statewide leaders like Kamlager Dove. The Board of Supervisors supported this with a 4-5 vote. So it was massively supported, and it was led by the leaders here in LA County that are working towards decarceration, organizations like Initiate Justice, like LA Can, like BLMLA. So this was a grassroots effort, and we utilized our grassroots power to make significant changes to LA County, and now the county is moving forward with implementation. Set up an advisory committee of community members that is now informing how these dollars are allocated to our communities. It's really the gold star of what it looks like to really heed that call for divestment in systems of harm and investment into our communities. So I'll stop there and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Yvette. We have a question, which is probably a question that carried on from the previous conversation. But it's crucial to what you're speaking of. The police union is a large part of the pushback against a lot of these ongoing reforms. Is there any indication that they're losing their influence, maybe based on the voter turnout? And furthermore, is there anything else that you perceive can be done to reduce the impact that these police unions have?
That's a great question. I mean, the police unions have a lot of money. and they've tried to stall progress at the state level and at the local level with their millions and millions of dollars. But what we're seeing now is a fractioning of the worker unions, and I would say police unions being special interest groups. Their interest is actually not supporting our community members. I want to point out that there's a lot of folks that are impacted by the carceral system and impacted by divestment, Black and brown folks in particular, that go into law enforcement because it's well-paying jobs, because it's a strong, they have strong collective bargaining. And so there's a dissonance there between the members of these quote unquote unions, I would say special interest groups, and the actual impact that these unions or these special interest groups are having on their communities. And so there's starting to be a fractioning of workers, worker unions, and these special interest law enforcement unions. And so we've seen that through Measure J. We were able to build with our partners in labor, the Carpenters Union, Unite Here Local 11, who has been at the forefront of pushing back against sheriff violence. And so that we're starting to see unions that are actually representing working people actually pull away from law enforcement. And we're going to continue seeing that trajectory, right? When the folks that are most impacted, our union members, our Black and brown working people, are seeing the violence that the sheriff's department, that the LAPD is imposing on our people, that dissonance is going to require action. And we're already seeing that happen. And so us as organizers on the ground, it is our duty to keep building with our union partners, to actually start investing and building in healthy communities. So I see that trajectory, and I think pointing out the money that the law enforcement special interest groups are pouring into harmful policies and connecting the dots for people, I think is going to be really important moving forward.
What are some challenges for Measure J to be implemented?
Yeah, so one of the challenges that I would say is that bureaucratic impulse that I was referencing earlier. So the CEO's office here in LA County makes all of the fiscal proposals. The CEO puts together the budget, presents it to the board, and the board ultimately approves it. But the CEO's office has been historically very conservative, and LA County has been historically very conservative about shifting funding in any substantial way out of law enforcement. And so what I've been observing is that the county is leaning back into those impulses and saying, well, we can defund certain programs that exist in order to fund Measure J approved programming. And so basically shuffling around health and human services dollars rather than actually doing what the spirit of Measure J asks for, which is divestment from systems of harm and investment into our communities. And so that's going to be an ongoing fight. And the board also has 3 years to implement Measure J. So they may have a very small budget allocation towards Measure J funding this year. And they may also, and I'm hearing this around the county, may say, well, we're already investing in the Office of Diversion and Reentry. That should count as Measure J dollars. When in fact, we want new dollars. We want money on top of what the county has already been investing in health and human services. And so those are going to be a couple of challenges, and also community participation. Ultimately, what we want is participatory budgeting. The community being able to work alongside the county to create the budget that actually supports our community members. And so that's going to be an ongoing battle to be able to create that system of participatory budgeting so that the county actually starts realizing the promise of a Care First Jail's last vision.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready to move on to Prop 25.
This one's a doozy. So I'll give a little bit of background. So Prop 25 really started with SB 10, Senate Bill 10, which was Hertzberg's bill. And initially, when Prop 25, or excuse me, SB 10 came out, a lot of us supported it. We didn't think it was perfect, but we thought it's a step forward in the right direction. So myself included, I lobbied for SB 10. I went up to the Sacramento, and I know a lot of us in our coalition supported, although, you know, with the understanding that there were problems, but that it was an okay bill. It was enough to help our communities in an incremental first step. However, at the last hour, Senator Hertzberg, in partnership with the Judicial Council and the Probation Department, did a bait and switch. They switched the language of the bill entirely to be a bill that we could not support. And we could not support it for various reasons. And one is that it gave more funding to law enforcement. So the Probation Department is another arm of law enforcement. And in fact, it is responsible for funneling our folks back into the system through really high levels of supervision that prevent folks from working, from living with their family members oftentimes. And so probation department is not actually supporting our communities in transition. They're another branch of law enforcement and are incredibly harmful. And so it gave millions and millions of dollars to law enforcement through the bill. It also expanded what we call judicial discretion. So judges have the power to override what are called risk assessment instruments, which I'll get to in a minute. And they increase their power to preventatively detain someone. And then the last piece that we were opposed to was the use of algorithmic-based risk assessment instruments. And so these are formulas that look at discrete facts about an individual, such as their age, which is the number one data factor, their neighborhoods, their zip codes, to determine whether someone is high risk, medium risk, or low risk. But these risk assessment instruments have been proven again and again by researchers at Harvard, at MIT, at UCLA, that these risk assessment instruments actually facilitate incarceration. And they're not actually reflective of a person's dangerousness. And they're biased towards Black and brown people and biased towards young people, young Black and brown men in particular. And so this is harmful technology that's already being used. And here in Los Angeles County has been used to incarcerate our folks. And so because of those reasons, we were staunchly opposed to SB 10 and then Prop 25. So Prop 25 was put up by the bail bonds industry to stop SB 10, because SB 10 passed despite our opposition. SB 10 passed at the legislature. Bail bonds industry came out with Prop 25. And we came out in opposition to Prop 25. So Prop 25 would have, if passed, would have set the standard across the state of this model of more dollars to probation departments, more power to the judiciary, and mandated risk assessment instruments across the state. So we opposed this, and we said, no, we don't support money bail, we don't support the bail bonds industry, and we don't support law enforcement. Neither of these bodies are actually helping our community members. And I want to make the distinction that often folks lean into the harmful practices of the private sector, which I think is what was happening here in Prop 25. I want to point out that folks will often oppose private prisons, for example, but not challenge the public prison system, even though the public prison system is 92% of the prison system. And so there was such a fixation on getting the bail bonds industry out, but empowering law enforcement in the process. And we said no to either of those things. And we said that there's a different path forward, that we can implement what we call preserving the presumption of innocence. So it's not enough to just end money bail. We need to really tackle the bigger issue of pretrial incarceration. That's the issue. Here in LA County, nearly half of our folks are in pretrial incarceration. In areas like Riverside, it's over 86% pretrial. And it's not just because folks can't afford money bail. Yes, that's a huge issue, but it's because of the practice of preventative detention, classifying a certain community as high risk or dangerous before they're even convicted. These are folks that are legally innocent. They have not been convicted, but they're too risky, too dangerous to be in the community according to the judiciary. So the judiciary has had a lot of power. And we saw that California can end money bail the Judicial Council can set that policy. They did at the beginning of COVID. They sent out a $0 bail order across California. And we were told that, well, if Prop 25 is defeated, we can't do bail reform legislation. We can't do it. And just a few weeks ago, Senator Hertzberg himself released SB 262, which would create a standard of $0 bail for most misdemeanor and low-level offenses, low-level charges. And so we're already seeing that our ability to defeat Prop 25 has opened the door to actual legislation that is actually helping and addressing the issue without empowering law enforcement. So I'm very glad that Senator Hertzberg has eaten his own words and put up a bail reform bill that actually is aligned with community, a $0 bail bill without funding law enforcement. It's what we were arguing all along: pass a clean bill. Pass a clean $0 bill. And because we were able to defeat Prop 25, that's the only way forward. So $0 bail is something that we've called for, but we see this as a first step. $0 bail is just the first step. We need to tackle the larger issue of pretrial detention and actually expand pretrial release to most accused folks. Holding someone who is legally innocent in jail has inflated our jail system, continues to justify funneling billions of dollars to the carceral system. And it actually can cause someone to lose their job, can cause someone to lose their children, and in some instances can even cause someone to lose their life. So pretrial incarceration is incredibly dangerous, and that's the North Star that we need to be working towards. And it might be incremental steps like the $0 bill, but we shouldn't be trading in taking away power from one institution of harm in order to empower another institution of harm. So I'll stop there and take questions.
Thank you, Yvette. We have some questions. Some of the questions that came in were regarding Measure J that we didn't get to, but obviously they're very applicable to just the ongoing conversation. What are some strategies to broaden support and keep the heat on to disable some of these large systemic organizations that continue to get in the way of reform?
Yeah, I think coalition building is critical. So one of the things that we did in the Measure J battle was at the onset of the campaign, create a policy table, create a hub for organizations to come together, understanding that we were convinced Measure J would pass, and it sure did. And so we were already planning for the implementation of this measure on the onset of the campaign. And so it continued to engage a broader swath of our organizations that wanted to see this through. Another piece that I think is super critical, and this is a call out to our philanthropic partners, continuing to invest in implementation. It's not enough to just pass something on the ballot. We need to have ongoing support through implementation. And shout out to Liberty Hill and some of other philanthropic partners that have been invested in making sure to see these implementation pieces through, because implementation work is not sexy. It is difficult. It has tons of hoops to jump through, and it's when often our movement kind of loses steam. We throw in so hard to get something passed, and then when implementation happens, we're exhausted, which is why it's so important to keep building coalitions, to keep expanding the coalitions. And what I've seen with Measure J is that we actually have more organizations participating now through implementation than we did when we were running the campaign. And so that movement building, that inclusion of folks, and then centering folks on shared values. So we articulated our shared values at the onset of Measure J, and really sticking to those shared values while we uplift the leadership of the most impacted community members is how we continue that momentum through implementation and through the next battle that we're going to fight.
And speaking of participatory budgeting, how can voters and the communities at large continue to stay in the loop on it? And there was a specific question of an attendee who is an advocate for participatory budgeting in Burbank. How can local groups stay in contact and advocate for that in other areas outside LA or LA County?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there are statewide coalitions like Californians United for a Responsible Budget that are a lot of our political home and have been doing this analysis around budgeting and participatory budgeting for a very, very long time. So I definitely encourage folks to tap into the CURB network to really connect with other folks across the state that are invested in this work, that are invested in finding strategies for participatory budgeting. Here in LA County, a lot of that work is housed within the Reimagine LA Coalition, within the Justice LA Coalition, where we're really looking at strategies to pass motions for participatory budgeting or to be more active and engaged with the county. The Board of Supervisors meets every other week. We provide public comment. We uplift the need for participatory budgeting. And then we also have relationships that we've cultivated with the county. There are allies in every county that agree with you. It's hard to find them sometimes, and it's hard to get your foot in the door. But I assure you, there are allies in your county that are aligned with you. So it's our duty to find these allies that have a voice within the county to start building with them internally. It's the inside outside strategy that has been so effective for Justice LA and LA organizations, being able to build those allyships and then also put the outside pressure, uplifting the demand for community participation in our budgeting process. Fran, I think you're on mute.
Oh, okay, there. I'm sorry. I'd like to take a couple minutes to give all three of you a chance to sort of give some closing remarks. And I think the one question that I've seen coming up all the time from people who are here, they want to know what can they do to help. And so you might each want to address that in sort of a 1-minute closing. And Yvette, why don't we start with you since you're already spotlighted here.
Oh, there's so much you can do to help. We need all hands. Like, liberation is going to take every single one of us. And so for the Justice LA Coalition, we have 3 virtual actions every week. So that's Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And our virtual actions engage individuals that want to support our demands. So it can look like writing to the Board of Supervisors, writing public comments to the Board of Supervisors, or signing a petition to the governor. So we have different actions every week, and we support the various work of our members through those actions, and anyone can participate. Anyone can call in or sign up for our virtual actions, and they've been incredibly impactful. It's how we got Measure J on the ballot, because we had 7,000 to 10,000 people in LA County submit public comment every Board of Supervisor meetings. It's a network that we created due to the pandemic to be able to activate folks, but it has been incredibly effective. I would also say, use your privilege. So you know more than anyone what your privilege is, whether it's relationship with funders, whether it's relationships with organizations or elected officials. Utilize those relationships to uplift these conversations and plant the seeds of change in your organizations, in your networks, and with leaders in our county. And lastly, I would say, use your talents. So if you are a really amazing graphic designer or an artist or a poet, if you can bring people together to have tough conversations, use whatever talents you have. We all have them. And so figure out what it is that you have, that special gift that you have, that you can contribute to the work.
Thank you. Taina?
I mean, first, I'll just say ditto to everything that Yvette said about using your talents and using your privilege. So I won't even waste my time trying to say it better than they said it. But I will also encourage folks to become a member of Initiate Justice so that you can continue to stay involved in all of our campaigns. We're working on several bills this year, including the Racial Justice Act, and a bill to improve access to programming and credits, and a bill to repeal gun enhancements retroactively in California. So we're doing big things. Please support our work. To become a member, the easiest way is to join our member meetings. which are the first Wednesday of the month from 6 to 8:30 p.m. on Zoom. So you can join from anywhere, and it's open to everybody, impacted people and allies and supporters. And you can get the information for our member meetings either on our website at initiatejustice.org, or you can follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We're there at Initiate Justice. So yeah, there are plenty of things you can do to be involved. We also, as I mentioned earlier, we have 35,000 currently incarcerated members. That's a lot of letters. We get a lot of mail, lots of people, asking us policy questions, and we need as many volunteers as we can to help us respond to those letters. So if you want to be involved in mail in particular, join our member meetings and you'll get the details on how to do that.
Thank you. And last but not least, Gloria.
I'm just sitting here chuckling and so honored to be sharing this panel with these two amazing women. And I concur with everything they've had to say. It was a great pleasure. I know the League worked very closely with Initiate Justice. While we differed on Prop 25, and we probably at the League felt that we just needed to get rid of a bail, we recognize the opposition and the many points. I'm really thrilled that we will continue to work on elimination of bail, because it's something that we recognize has been so harmful. I just want to say, this is largely a League audience, but those who are not League members, I hope you become League members. But I would urge all of our League members to continue to listen to the voices of groups like these, to be involved and informed. And while we have a lot of work ahead of us, let's continue to work toward reaching out, and as part of our work in being more inclusive within the League is to work with groups like both of these groups and many others that are working so hard for social reform. What we can all do collectively and as individuals to make our voices heard and to support those who are working so hard on the ground. I really encourage that. I encourage also local leagues to think about what Yvette just said. We've got the legislation passed. We know there are laws. Are they being implemented? And this is the hard work. And I appreciate that comment. The hard work now is making sure that these get enforced, and we need to be observers. Finally, I will say something that I reflect on often, is that our democratic institutions are being attacked. I'm sensitive to the need for us to perhaps reach out to the other side and to talk to our neighbors and our friends and help have conversations about these tough social issues, to encourage greater thought and openness and a generosity of heart that enables us to be more open to communities that we may not be familiar with, to issues and concerns. Someone talked about use your privilege. I think that was Yvette. Yes, many of us are privileged. What can we do to extend ourselves and to use the positions we have and the connections we have to expand the need for change? And I think we're at a good time. I want to be very positive. I'm sorry, I have to say this, two young women who are just amazing, we've just heard from. I'm just very honored to learn from them, to be with them, and for the League to be able to work with you both and your organizations. There are organizations like this throughout California in our neighborhoods. Let's reach out, work with them. This is about the work of the League as our policy thinking and our work on government, because we believe in good government and we believe in a good society and making that better. These are our partners, partners we haven't perhaps always worked with in the past. The work in this past 2020 election on all of these ballot measures, I remember back in early last spring, working with some of the folks, not necessarily with Tania, but with other people with Initiate Justice. Some of our League members went on lobbying calls to legislators that we knew were to get the legislation passed so it could be on the ballot. And that was an exciting time for us to be working with Initiate Justice, with groups like this, Mia Familia, and we've begun to work with a lot of groups we haven't done. Let's do more of that. And I encourage all of us to take it upon ourselves individually, to be informed, to be open, and to work tirelessly. Democracy is at threat, and we have a job. I think the League has a huge job ahead of itself to help repair some of the damage. the one thought I had about police unions, maybe we need to work with them. Maybe we need to change them from the inside too, because there's some good people in law enforcement. Maybe we need to make some change there too, so that they begin to see our points of view. So I'll end it with that and just say, let's make 2021 a really good year. And thank you so
Well, I
much
have
for
to
having
tell
this
you-
panel.
I have to tell you that the three amazing women that we've heard from today, I think we're on a wonderful road, and I think everyone has put their contact information in the chat. So if you want to follow up with these organizations, the information is in the chat. I'm going to turn this over after I say thank you again so much for giving up your Saturday morning and enlightening us. It's been a wonderful panel. I want to turn it over to Diana Lindsay, who is the membership chair of the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles.
Well, thank you, everyone. We just want to again say thank you to these three amazing women who have just enlightened us with more information, more inspiration, and also given us more opportunities to participate. Thank you so much. I placed in the chat how you can join the League of Women Voters of Los Angeles. We are so happy. I'm opening my hands. Come on. We're happy to have you. We want you to be a part of our league. We are here to help you. We are a nonpartisan organization. We want to grow what we have started, what Fran and all the other members have started. It is now going into another level of DEI. We want more diverse members from all of areas of Los Angeles, disability, color, gender, race, heritage, economic background. We want you because you offer something, which is your experience, your background, and who you are that can add to who we are as a league. Would you please consider joining us today? Again, the information is in the chat on how to join. You can go to info, which is an email address. You can call us at 213-368-1616. And then we also have the my.lwv.org/California/Los-Angeles. That's how you can go onto our website, click the purple button join, and I will get your information. We'll start a conversation and we'll go on. We have a membership committee. We thank you all so much for your time and attention. And we want to turn it back over to either Fran or Nancy. Thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. Happy holiday. Happy February.
Thanks, everyone. Tonight was actually our closer. So with that, we'll let you go on with your weekends. And thank you again so much for joining us today and all the panelists, Fran, Mary Lou for keeping the technology going. Thank you all for being here with us today.